Greetings, welcome to Psych 101. We are wrapping up chapter 10 today with a talk about emotions. You might have noticed we're skipping human sexuality. Read it, questions will be on the quiz, but to really get into that again, we want to get into Psych 102, which uses the same textbook. So emotions, what are they anyway? The definition given in the book is a little bit weird, but we're going to roll with it as much as we can. Subjective, check. We can all agree on that. That is, how do you know someone's sad? Well, probably you ask them, and if they tell you they're experiencing sadness, you probably trust them. It's really hard to have objective experiences of emotions. So if you're working at the psychiatric hospital, you get to the end of your shift and you're keeping notes on individual patients, whoever you were assigned. Maybe over the course of the day, Johnny seemed to get really mad, and you figure he was really mad because he flipped over a table and punched Steve in the face. But in your notes, you cannot write that Johnny was angry. All that you can write is that Johnny flipped over a table and punched Steve, because you're not able to make internal attributions about the affective state of the person. You can only see what you saw from where you are. So emotions would be purely subjective territory. You have your emotions, and it's really not up to outside observers to impose definitions of those on you. When you're sad, do you feel the same way I feel when I'm sad? Probably the way that we talk and write about sadness seems fairly consistent across time, place, and culture. But it's still personal to you, and you're the best judge of your feelings. Conscious, that is, we tend to know how we feel. There's a little arguability here. Sometimes people are relatively detached from their emotions, but our emotion state is usually accessible to us. They're relatively intense, relative compared to what? Mood, which we'll get to in a second. And this is the part that's weird, is the book is drawing on literature that suggests that emotions are intentional. But I'm not sure what they mean by that. Like, having an emotion, is it intended to achieve something in the environment? I can't see how that would be true. And you certainly cannot choose to be happy or choose to be sad. It's like sweating. You can't choose to sweat or not sweat, but you can, to a degree, change your circumstances or activities and influence whether or not you're sweating. So don't ask me any questions about this part, the intentionality part, because I have no idea what the authors of the book mean by this. But if you come to a mastery quiz question about it, emotions are intentional. Okay, let's leave that there for now. Mood, on the other hand, would be more of a background that influences other emotions. Maybe you woke up in a grouchy mood, and so you're prone to be angry or snappy or irritable or terse. But you could have any of a number of sort of correlating emotions in the field of that mood. And it tends to lack the qualities of emotionality. So, it would still be subjective, but it wouldn't necessarily be very conscious. You might not know you're in a bad mood until something happens to trigger a specific emotion. And it might not have triggered that emotion on another day. You woke up really cheerful, and so a lighthearted message from a colleague that normally you'd ignore, it really touches you. Okay, so now you know that you're in that positive and upbeat kind of mood. And it would be relatively unintense, so pretty background, might not notice. We have three main theories of emotions from a number of theorists. These are the last names of theorists, William James and whoever it is, Lange. Their idea is that arousal precedes emotion. When you're having an emotion, then that emotion is based on, grows out of some arousal state. Maybe you're driving and you hit a patch of ice and your limbic system kicks into gear. Your limbic system triggers your motor cortex knows what to do on ice, and you spin, and your your knuckles go white on the wheel, your heart starts to pound really fast, your adrenaline kicks in, and now you're sitting on the roadside, and only then do you start to go, oh wow, I'm really scared, because your emotion state has followed your arousal state. Okay, your heart is pounding, you're sweating, you're shaking, you must be afraid. Fear follows from there. And of course, there's no point being scared now because the car has come to a stop and either something bad has happened or nothing bad has happened, and fear is not going to help you navigate the situation. So for James-Lange, arousal precedes emotion. Then we'd have the Cannon-Bard theory, and that would be that arousal and emotion aren't necessarily connected. Humans have a wide range of affective states which are far more complicated than the sort of on-off states of the arousal system. So they just say it's improbable that simple arousal can give rise to the various complicated and sometimes ambiguous affective states that humans experience. So you're in that car and you're spinning out of control and your limbic system's kicked in and the adrenal glands are on and you're gripping the wheel and at the same time going, wow, this is terrifying. Okay, they arouse simultaneously and independently. But then Schacter-Singer would come along and say, you have the arousal, but emotion states actually are fairly similar. And so there'd have to be some level of interpretation to know what it is that you actually feel. All right, so you come to consciousness and you find that you're in a church facing forward. Everyone you can see ahead of you and in your peripheral vision, they're wearing black. There's a sermon going on and everyone around you is crying. You touch your face and find that you also are crying. Your chest is heaving. You have this feeling. And what is this feeling? Well, it depends what actually is going on in the church. If you interpret it as a funeral, then what you're doing is grieving. But turn your head a little bit and you realize that they've segregated the church. Everyone on this side's wearing black because we're in tuxedos. You're on the male side. And on the female side, everyone's wearing colorful dresses, their Sunday best. And everyone's crying and they have the little fans out. And they're crying because it's a marriage and there's nothing to grieve. What people are feeling is intense joy. If I were to hook you up with a bunch of biophysiological equipment, let's say a sphygmomanometer or blood pressure cuff, and a pulse ox reader, and a skin conductivity meter, and whatever else you can imagine, there really is no difference in the body between joy and grief. All that I can detect with that biophysiology is arousal. I can see if you're in a high arousal state or a low arousal state, but your subjective experience of that arousal state, I cannot differentiate. In fact, you almost can't either. In your brain, joy and grief are basically the same thing. The thrill of anticipation and the fear of dangerous animals in your brain are basically the same. And there's just this small difference, which is a matter of interpretation. What's happening in the environment tells you whether that feeling is joy or grief, whether it's fear or excitement. They're biophysiologically very, very similar. So one of my patients years and years ago, he had Korsakoff syndrome. So he had the inability to make any new memories and had forgotten most of his life back to his teenage years. He also was a scrapper. As a young man, he fought all the time and got beat up all the time. He had a bad back. So he'd sit in the common room at the hospital with his back pain, just sitting there in pain, and then he'd look around at the environment. And Because it's the psych hospital, there's usually something weird and untoward or frightening happening at the psych ward. So in those contexts, with the feelings of his body, this gentleman interpreted his body state as angry. And so he'd get up and come to start fights or something. Um, and we learned that we had to give him different ways to interpret his body states. If he could sit in the day room with a Walkman from the 80s, because he was from the 80s, headphones in his ears with like Night Ranger playing, and you could put it on loop back and forth all day, he wouldn't remember he just heard that song 15 minutes ago, you know? So then when he interprets his body state, he interprets it in the context of just chilling in the day room with the TV on and good tunes in your ears, and he realizes he is not angry at all. He has to go to the bathroom. Okay. So Schacter-Singer, cognitive interpretation of arousal leads to the subjective emotion state, but the biological component of the emotion states is very similar across emotions. All right. Grief and joy are the same thing. What does this lead to? It leads to the person who's unwilling ever to grieve is also unwilling ever to feel great joy, because great joy and grief are the same thing. It's the same neural pathways through the brain, and just this one little component of interpretation that makes this experience subjectively different from this experience, okay? When we avoid grief, we also avoid joy. So let's go back a little bit to the thing about Maslow and Viktor Frankl, all right? Leading to this statement that you don't get to choose whether to suffer, right? Your choice in life is not between suffering and not suffering. At best, it is between suffering for something and suffering for nothing. If you choose to avoid relationships so that you never feel grief, you also limit your affective states such that you never feel joy. And now you're suffering from the emptiness and loneliness of experience instead. Okay. All right. So when it comes to neuroanatomy, the major structure implicated in emotionality is the amygdala. Amygdala sits in the middle of the limbic system, and it connects to immediate memory systems and to attentional systems. Amy G. Dalla, she feels mostly anger and fear and anger. So way down there in the limbic system, what she's doing is comparing incoming stimuli with things that might be associated with fear states, threat states, okay? So that's why the hippocampus is right there, in order to rifle through memory and see, is this a thing that's caused us trouble in the past? If it is, activate that attentional system and focus in on that threat stimuli, and meanwhile sound red alert and activate things in the brain stem that kick off the adrenal system. When it comes to other emotions, it's difficult to associate Amy G very, very closely with other affective states, but fear and anger, she's right there. Next topic from our book is going to be display rules. Eckman's faces. Let's hit Eckman first. I want to hit Eckman's faces before we do that. So Eckman goes around the world and takes photographs of people all over the world in all sorts of cultural contexts. And what he realizes is that people display a limited number of emotions. We wind up with eight forms of emotion, and they're not all what ordinary people even would agree are emotions. I don't even remember them all, but obviously anger, fear, sadness, happiness, and then it's like curiosity, disgust, and a couple of other things. So we might not agree all those things are emotions, but they're basic emotions. They're the stuff everyone's born with, and we all show in the same way. In basically the same way. If someone's smiling in Siberia and someone's smiling in Mozambique, that smile probably signifies the same internal state in that person, especially if it's an honest smile that involves the full face, including the crinkling around the eyes, okay? Um, babies also seem to come pre-programmed to display the same 8 basic emotions. Emotions mean the same thing wherever you are in the world. Weirdly, love is not one of those basic emotions. And lots of people claim to experience the feeling of love, but love is not an emotion. So, in particular, romantic love, the way that it's done in America, has deep cultural contexts. Love could be any of 8 emotions according to the Greeks. So not an emotion, it's not one of the basic emotions anyone follows, definitely not one. In one interpretation, love is 8 different emotions, ranging from agape, the love for humans in the abstract, to fraternal love, the love of your family, and filial piety, passionate love, which sort of originates in the groin sort of region, um, patriotism, the love of country, right? Lots of different emotions that we talk about as love. But maybe love's not even multiple emotions. It doesn't make much sense because they're just not consistent. We don't have what is the face someone makes when they feel patriotic? Exactly. That's weird, right? That's weird. Um, so maybe it's a context in which other emotions happen. In other words, more like a mood, except that even moods are somewhat temporary and love could be theoretically longer lasting. Let's say that you find out your kid cheated on a test and you are mad as hell. But then you find out that lots of kids cheated on the test, and actually you don't care whether other people's kids cheat on tests, right? They're abstract to you. They mean nothing to you. You don't love them, and therefore you can't be disappointed in their behavior. Maybe you're at Thanksgiving dinner with grandma, and grandma is spouting some horrible racist ideology. But she taught you to be better, and so you're mad as hell. But some old lady on a bus says racist things, and maybe it irritates you, but you forget about her as soon as you walk away. Why? You don't love her. You don't have a long relationship in which she taught you to be a better person than she's being right now. So this is love as the context for other kinds of emotions. But probably love is best understood as a verb. So let me lay this on you. Love is the action of putting the interests of others over the interests of the self. Like it, don't like it, it's fine. It's fine, honestly. So I'm autistic, and I've never had the experience of love as an emotion. Maybe not never, but rarely, and it's been pretty weird when it's happened, like being on a psychedelic trip. Um, so maybe it's true that humans do have love as specific subjective internal emotional states, but without that last part, without putting the interest of others ahead of the interest of self, what good is it though? What is love but a secondhand emotion, as Tina Turner would say? And that's nice, but what have you done for me lately? According to Janet Jackson, maybe, but don't quote me. In other words, you love your kids, but you're working a day labor job. So you go to Home Depot every day and you sit around outside with the placard, "Will work for cheap," or whatever. The van comes and you get a gig today. You get to help someone move. At the end of the day, they give you $20. With $20, you can keep your cell phone on, make a minimum payment on some bill, and then buy one pizza from the 7-Eleven, the only place in your neighborhood to get food. You go home and you have kids to feed and maybe a spouse, and you love them, but you eat the pizza. Exactly. What good is it? What good is it? Maybe you've been in those relationships with people who say that they love you, but put their needs consistently ahead of your needs. In that case, is that really love? Like, does the subjective internal experience actually matter in that case? So that's Eckman's faces, right? That's sometimes scientists think weird things. These are emotions, like disgust is an emotion now, but love isn't. Um, okay, and we can argue all that to death, I suppose. So now let's roll around to the display rules. Just because everyone seems to come equipped with the same 8 basic emotions doesn't mean we're all allowed to show them the same way. My favorite theory about the Cold War, and this is offered 90% jokingly, is about the differing display rules between Russians and Americans. Americans are very, very open people. Americans are expected to make a lot of eye contact and smile at each other and shake hands. We're having quite a difficult time in the COVID-19 outbreak because we expect to see each other's faces, and now we're being asked to stay home and cover yourself, and no more handshaking, no more touching. Hugging's become very popular in the last 10 years. I was always against that. I was against hugging before it was popular to be against hugging. But Americans are very, very open people. In the meantime, in some other countries, open displays of emotion are signs of weakness or stupidity. All right. So French people come to America, and we often think they're quite arrogant because everything's better in France, and this is not what a cafe au lait is supposed to be, and a lot of complaining and like national pride. And Americans don't like that. Meanwhile, French people smile noticeably less than American people. France is a noticeably less open country. In fact, we only have one word for you, and we're all on a first name basis. But the French language, not only should you not start off on a first name basis, you shouldn't start off on a first pronoun basis. So there are 2 words for you that are used depending on the level of intimacy, tu and vous. And vous is used for strangers or superiors, and tu is used for intimates or subordinates. So maybe you've known someone a few years and you'll have the conversation, is it all right if I use the tu pronoun for you? Are we sufficiently intimate? Are we really friends rather than acquaintances? And from there you might move on to the equivalent of the first name basis. All right. So this American openness is really disconcerting sometimes for other people. When Americans go to France, we really assume that everyone is on a first name basis with us, and everyone's friendly, and everyone likes us. And we go around flashing smiles in countries where people just don't do that. Smiling's reserved for intimates. Russia in particular. Smiling is something that's done for intimates briefly and occasionally. Maybe your grandchildren have especially pleased you today, and you favor them with the briefest, mildest of smiles that comes and goes, like the sun coming out of the clouds for a second on an overcast day, and everyone notices, and it's special and it matters. And you go back to the stoic sort of demeanor. People who go around smiling all the time are fools. They're the village idiot, the holy fool. The hermit would do that. All right. So now imagine this: World War II is over, and the newly forming Soviet Union and the victorious United States are basically going to carve up the rest of the world into spheres of influence. Not specific territories, but spheres of influence. You get this, we get that. Let's do a treaty. All right. So there's a bunker somewhere in under Berlin, which is about to be cut in half. Berlin's about to be karate chopped in half, east and west. In that bunker, the American and the Soviet diplomat are about to meet for the first time, right? And the Soviet diplomat stands up and goes like, "Hello, I am Igor Stravinsky, Now we will negotiate. Dour face, stiff body language. And inside, the American's crumbling. He's like, man, they sent some steely-eyed missile man to do the negotiating. And really worried about this. Like, are they negotiating in good faith, or is this going to be like a huge power move or something? Are we in for more than we thought we were in for? Okay. But then the American stands up and he's like, "Hi, I'm Bob Baker, Dan. Glad to meet you." And inside, the Russian's crumbling. He's like, who is this buffoon? They sent an idiot. No one can be this stupid. Is it stupidity or is it an act? Either way, they are not here in good faith. And something as simple as that, as this basic difference in the way people show emotion, could lead to 75 years of Cold War. You know what I mean? So there's that. Yeah, good. The Cold War. Did that literally happen? No. But also, yes. Like dozens and dozens and dozens of times, we had interactions with people who have radically different display rules for emotions and cultural contexts and customs and stuff. Americans and Japanese business people. In Japan, it would be really rude to tell somebody no to a proposal, and so you'd say maybe. And like from 1950 to the year 2000, how many American delegations came home to the US thinking, we are absolutely doing business with this Japanese organization, whereas the Japanese organization was never ever going to call them back, because they hadn't figured out that Americans were taking maybe as yes, and Americans hadn't figured out that Japanese people were using maybe to mean no, absolutely not if you were the last company on earth. All right, so cultural differences, absolutely. Display rules, the same basic emotions are everywhere, but who's allowed to show what kind of emotions to what degree? You don't even have to cross cultures to do that. Even like saying America as a culture, that's kind of a stupid way to proceed. America is a weird mishmash conglomeration of cultures with regional differences, and it's so complicated. Saying Americans is a really weird way to do business. But here we would have on average male-female differences in emotional expression. Specifically, men are allowed to be angry but not sad. And women are allowed to be sad but not angry. That could be changing. Younger people are raised with a lot more freedom of expression and fewer gender stereotypes, but on average, this is still really, really true. Like if your mom has ever told you, I'm very disappointed in you, what you should know is she's mad as hell. Disappointment is a sad word, not an angry word, because women are allowed to be sad. Women aren't allowed to be angry in America. We have a specific word for angry women in America, don't we? And it starts with B, and I'll let you figure out the rest. Okay? Like how could we know? How could we demonstrate that that's true? We have two main ways. One is we're going to have a gender-neutral avatar. It's a computer-generated face, and all of the cues for gender have been removed. So we know it's gender-neutral when about half of people say it's male and about half of people say it's female, okay? And there might even be this group of people in the middle who admits they don't really know. And then we're going to put an angry expression on that face. And when we put anger on the gender-neutral avatar, people suddenly start to recognize that it's male. And if we put the sad expression on the gender-neutral avatar, then people start to interpret that avatar as female, because angry goes with male and sad goes with female. We could also take male and female models and have them model a facial expression that's halfway between sad and angry. It has some components of each. And when people see that same ambiguous expression on males, they interpret it as angry. When they see that ambiguous expression on females, they interpret that as sad. Okay, next thing, bidirectional effects. What we're talking about here is that sometimes the display of the emotion causes the subjective experience of the emotion and not vice versa. That is, you're not always smiling because you're happy. Sometimes you're happy because you are smiling. What we're going to do is we're going to have people model a facial expression, but we're going to trick them into it. We're not going to say, all right, now I want you to smile. Grab a pen, make sure you're the only one who's ever touched the pen, rub it down with your bleach wipes first, give it a rinse, don't put bleach in your mouth. All right, ready? So you're going to take, you don't even have to do this, but this is how the experiment would work. We're going to do a facial exercise. I want you to put the pen between your teeth, and then holding the pen between your teeth, I want you to pull your lips as far from the pen as you can, and then, okay, so already you feel like an idiot, right? Great, fantastic. And already you're making kind of a smiley face, but what's missing? The eyes are missing. So the next part of the exercise is bring the corners of your lips up towards your eyes, and the corners of your eyes downward toward the lips, and then hold that for 15 seconds. Take 10 seconds off, repeat for 15 seconds. Now we're exercising our faces, okay? And it looks like that. It's ridiculous. If you're going to be a psychologist, you have to be prepared to seem ridiculous sometimes. All right. And then we're going to have another group of people make a facial expression that doesn't actually correlate with any emotions. We're both going to watch like a traffic safety video. When the video's over, I'm going to ask people to rate their emotional state. And the people who made the smiley face rate themselves as happier than the people who made a neutral face. Okay, so we're through the book material, and I mean, all this lecture stuff is optional anyway. But if you're done, I mean, if you're out of time, whatever, turn it off. You won't really miss anything in terms of passing mastery quizzes. But there's a ton of stuff left out of the book here that's really, really important. So I have you maybe, and I want to lay all this stuff on you. When in the past we were categorizing emotions, we might put them on a wheel like 2 dimensions. There's this dimension and this dimension, all right? And this dimension is pleasant and unpleasant, and this dimension is high and low arousal. So you could have high arousal, pleasant emotions like joy, low arousal, unpleasant emotions like melancholia, all right? But you could fit everything in the wheel made by these emotions. And these days, I like to say pleasant and unpleasant versus positive and negative. You'll hear a lot of talk about positive and negative emotions, but remember that positive implies good and negative implies bad, and that's not what we're doing. Like, is anger bad? Is sadness bad? They're unpleasant, probably. I mean, some people like to be angry, but most people would say anger and sadness would be pretty unpleasant. But is it bad to be angry? Like, who's never angry? Probably the no one with, oh my God, probably the person with no attachments and no values is never angry. All right. These days, you should be indignant. If you know what's happening in the world, you should be mad about it. If you watch cable news for more than 45 seconds, you should be mad as hell. Okay? Is that bad? Well, it's a battery. Anger's a battery, and you can put it into productive or unproductive or even socially acceptable or unacceptable activities. Okay? You could get really angry, but then become an advocate for justice or for a group of people, but powered by that anger, you could get a lot of work done. Mother Teresa, perhaps you've heard of, was not a happy lady. She witnessed the poverty and the suffering caused by the caste system largely, and just by national poverty in Bangladesh, and she devoted her life to mitigating that poverty because it pissed her off. Okay, She wasn't happy a day in her life, apparently. So maybe positive and negative aren't the best words for our emotions, but you'll see them used a lot. I might even trip up and use them once or twice, but let's move away from there. Next thing, how many words could you come up with for a given emotion? So in a second, I want you to push pause. I want you to get a pencil and paper, and I want you to write down as many synonyms as you can without thesaurus, without the internet, just off the top of your head. How many words can you come up with for sad? All right, pause, take 3 minutes. How many words did you come up with? In 3 minutes, did you come up with just a couple or 5 or 6? Or do you have very high emotional intelligence and you were able to get in the like 18 to 20 range on synonyms for sadness? What did you leave out? You probably got melancholia because I mentioned it earlier. Did you get disconsolate or inconsolable? Maybe you didn't. So this is the state of affairs often for therapy patients or clients, is they arrive with really limited emotional vocabularies. So imagine I'm asking you to describe Colorado in pictures, but you can only use black and white, right? So I give you white paper and a stick of charcoal and ask you to draw the landscape in Colorado. How good a job can you do? With only the two colors, black and white, how can you really describe the majesty of being outdoors in Colorado? The brilliance of snow you might get in contrasts and shadows. But what about the faded denim blue of the sky? What about that eerie pink purple color the mountains turn at sunrise? What about the sear dun color of the dried out grasses in winter, and like that same tawny color all of the deer and the rabbits and even the birds have to blend into that grass? What about the emerald green of the conifer forests? And oh my god, you're leaving so much out with black and white. So when you don't have much of an emotional vocabulary, how can you tell me about your internal experiences, your internal landscape? Presumably, they're a lot more complicated than you're able to articulate, and there might be some value in expanding that vocabulary to improve the articulation, or there might be something else going on. Do you know people who only have one way of being angry? So they're as mad. They go through the drive-through at McDonald's, and the stressed out worker puts cheese on their burger, and they said no cheese, you know? And they're as mad about that as though their civil rights had been violated. One way to be angry, and it's full-on outrage. They don't have irritation or frustration or any of the gradations and steps in between. They're absolutely livid. They have one word for angry and one way to be angry. Do you know the people who only have one way to be sad? Is it you? Is it you? They were sad that Game of Thrones ended as if their mother had died. Okay, can we help them by teaching people more words for the emotions? Can we help them enact more ways to demonstrate emotions? Can we in fact enhance their internal experiences so that they can feel irritated instead of livid some of the time when it's appropriate, where they can feel disappointed or melancholic or nostalgic instead of at the peak of grief, right? All of the flavors and colors in between. Well, in therapy, over time, vocabularies tend to expand. The emotional vocabulary expands, but also the emotional repertoire tends to expand, right? So that's exactly what we find, that the more the person can talk about their internal experiences, the more shades there are of the various colors of emotional experience. But that's going to be a correlation rather than causation. Remember, science rule one, never infer, right? Never infer causation from correlation. So, do you know the people who are snobbish about their coffee, and they can like sip the coffee and tell you where it was, where the beans were grown, and what year and how long the beans were roasted and what process they used and stuff, right? That used to be me. Um, Not so much lately, but I went to coffee school when I was working as a barista back in 1990 something. And the same thing with the uniphiles or the wine tasters, right? They sip the wine and they swirl it around in their mouths and spit it out because they don't want the alcohol, they want the experience. And then they'll tell you like where in the world where the grapes were grown and what were the growing conditions that year, and everything. And they have these weird vocabularies for it, right? Like a hint of berries and flowers, and an insouciant hint of cat pee. Cat pee being the word that the wine tasters use to describe the ammonia content of the wine. And you probably never got past like red and white and sweet and dry, right? All these words, they just seem outlandish and pretentious. And is that wine taster having a different experience of the wine than you're having? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But they don't have better mouths than you do. They don't have like more sense receptors inside their mouth organs. What they have is a more highly developed gustatory region of the brain. Gustation being the taste sense. Why is that better? Because they spend a lot of time working on it. They sit around and sip wine together and talk about the experience, really concentrate on the experience. Your brain reflects your experience. And so they're growing, developing neural networks in this part of the brain, and they're much more sensitive to the flavors of wine in terms of perception, okay? Well, exactly the same thing happens in therapy. We spend a lot of time focusing on emotions, having the experiences of emotions and figuring out what they mean, reflecting on them. That reflection causes more vocabulary. I can help you out with words for the things you might be feeling. But that reflection also causes this differentiating experience. It causes more internal diversification of experience. Okay. Next thing, treating some kinds of emotions as illnesses. Is it okay to be sad? Americans don't like to be sad, man. Americans like to be happy. And if they can't be happy, they like to be outraged. Because when you're mad, it seems like there's something you can do about it. At worst, you could flame someone on Twitter and feel a little better. At best, you might be able to saddle up and go solve a problem. Anger, outrage tends to stem from things happening in the environment that are more or less amenable to control. But sadness is about loss. It's about things that are gone, and often there's nothing you can do about sadness except pretend not to feel it, okay? So Americans don't, by and large, like to be sad. Is that true of everyone everywhere? No, absolutely not. It's really specific to America. We have high feelings of self-efficacy. We like to retain those feelings, and our national identity is about being happy and outgoing, and also angry if you can't get happy and outgoing. Okay. So here we tend to treat sadness as a medical problem to be solved through medical interventions, right? So you tell your doctor that you've been sad for more than a minute and they're going to whip out the antidepressants. Yeah. Are we doing you a disservice, or should we just let some people be sad? What I want to make absolutely clear is I'm not saying depression doesn't exist. I am saying that it's radically overdiagnosed, and our first recourse for depression is usually medication instead of something else, instead of conversation, instead of addressing the social conditions leading so many to be isolated and sad and feel useless. But grab this book from the library if you are, if you're bored, need something to do. Ethan Waters, the book is Crazy Like Us, 2010. And this is about exporting American models of psychiatry and psychology and even emotional interpretation to other countries. When I was in China in 2010, what I noticed was everywhere I looked, there were ads for the NBA, for basketball. And being introduced to any male Chinese person, when you start learning a language, you start with a name in that language, right? So when I was learning French, I had to introduce myself as "Je m'appelle Jean," and my name's not Jean, it's Jason. So that's just a thing. So when men who spoke English would introduce themselves, 2 times out of 3, they said, "Hello, my name is Michael Jordan." Right. Okay. What the NBA figured out is there's some 328 million Americans, and that's a pretty large market for merchandise and cable packages and whatever. Okay. But there's 1.3 billion people in China. Their middle class is the size of our entire population. And if you can insert yourself into the Chinese marketplace, now you can make serious money. So everywhere I went, the NBA just carpet bombing with advertising. Guess who else figured that out? That's right, GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer Pharmaceuticals and Johnson & Johnson and everyone who makes antidepressants. Look, antidepressants alone account for $60 billion of sales per year in the United States of America. Imagine what you could do if you could convince everyone on the planet that they were depressed instead of just Americans. What Ethan Waters is saying is that prior to the advent of American psychiatric models in Japan, sadness was a spiritual enterprise, that the national religions are a specific kind of Buddhism and Shinto. And these things are about reflecting on the impermanence of experience. So when you're sad, it's because you're wise, okay? The Cherry Blossom Festival. Americans have a Cherry Blossom Festival, and you like to be on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. on the day that the cherry blossoms bloom. Even better if you could be in Tokyo when it's happening, and you get your phones out, right? And you get your selfies with the cherry blossoms in the background, and you prove to everyone that you check the thing off the list. Cherry blossoms, right time. And they're beautiful. The cherry blossoms, they're outrageously beautiful. It's like pink cotton candy snow. It's so amazing. That's not the point. That's not the point at all. The point is that they're amazing today. Now. This second. But tomorrow they'll be gone. The cherry blossoms drop from the trees into the streets, the sidewalks, the gutters, and they're stepped on and trampled and rained on and driven over, and the branches go bare. In this moment of beauty, there's also this future moment of loss at the same time. And it Americans would think that would detract from the beauty of the moment. We don't like to be sad. We don't like to think that this sunrise, you've gone camping and you're halfway up Cheyenne Mountain and the sun wakes you up. You're the only person, it's summer, it's 5:15 and the sun is rising and it's pink and perfect and spectacular. And you're there by yourself. You don't like to think you can never see that sunrise again. There will be other sunrises, but every future sunrise will be compared to this one. It'll happen in a world where you've seen the sunrise this way before, and the clouds won't be the same, and you won't be the same, and the sun won't be the same. Which gives us this Taoist phrase that you can't stand in the same river twice, because the river has moved on, and so have you. You don't like to think about that, but it adds poignancy, urgency to this experience of beauty. The cherry blossoms are beautiful now, and in 1 second they won't be. That's the point. That's the point. Your kid's first birthday party is their last first birthday party. When you kiss a boy for the first time, that's the last time you will ever kiss a boy for the first time. And this sadness in America, shooting every beautiful experience through with sadness would be seen as dysfunction. But in other times and places, is instead this intensely spiritual experience that doesn't detract. We're not so scared to be sad that the sadness, the poignancy detracts from the joy in the moment, the joy of that child's first birthday party. Okay. What do we lose by treating sadness and anger as problems to be solved instead of experiences to be had or sources of information? How do you know what your values are if you're never angry? How do you know that you've ever loved if you're never sad? And remember this. Remember that joy and grief are the same thing. What if you chose never to feel grief?